Hillary Clinton still seems to get a lot of hate, mostly from those on the left, but a lot of it, certainly coming from the right. But the truth is, Hillary Clinton was definitely right when she warned us about Donald Trump and, of course, his basket of deplorables, which they then turned around and used as a badge of honor. But if we had listened to those warnings back then, we may not be in the situation we're in today. And joining me now to talk about this is Salon.com contributor ChaunceyDeVega.com owner, Chauncey DeVega himself. Thank you for joining me today.
It is always a pleasure.
I just have to say, before we even get into this, when I took over the podcast here, my first thought was, all right, gotta get Chauncey, gotta get him on. You're absolutely one of my favorite people to talk to because we just have such wonderful conversations. So, thank you really for being here with me.
Well, I wish more folk had listened to our conversations over the years and warning about this neo-fascist Trumpian disaster. Because, again, we wouldn't be here if the public had chosen to listen to us, to other truth tellers, and, yes, to Hillary Clinton.
Well, and, that is one of the things I thought about reading this, because you and I actually did many segments together, in the run-up to the 2016 election, back when we were still doing Free Speech TV. And so a lot of things that you've hit on in this recent piece on Salon, it's things we talked about at the time. They are, in fact, the basket of deplorables. It's ridiculous that they made such a stink over this. You do have the racism that she had warned about, the misogyny, all of these things. She looks very prescient in hindsight here, and I wish people would wake up to that. I know, but she's a neoliberal. Listen, she was 100% correct about the dangers that Trump posed, wasn't she?
Absolutely. Going back to that truism, that age-old wisdom, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I think a lot of these folks who quite literally, and I described it as Hillary derangement syndrome based on the emails I received, quite literally sounding and reading like they were having some sort of mental health episode. They were decompensating because the very mention of Hillary Clinton drives these folks into a tizzy. But once you understand something that you and I have been warning the American people about, and others as well, this may be the last time you get to vote, and something that is superficially, at least, a free and fair election. That's the 2022 midterms. The Democrats are going to lose the midterms. All the data points to that. It's going to be a wipeout. Now the question becomes 2024. And again, all signs point to Trump, if he chooses to run or is in a position with his health to run, is going to win. So you have a lot of folk who are trying to be idealists. The world that they wish existed versus the world that does exist. This is an existential crisis for the American people, for this country's democracy, especially for black and brown folk, women, the differently abled, the poor. We can go down the list, vulnerable, marginalized communities who are already catching hell. This is going to look like heaven compared to what Trump and the Republicans do on their revenge tour. So, folks, you don't have the luxury of having the perfect candidate, and you don't have the luxury of claiming your virtue and principles tell you to hate Hillary Clinton for whatever reason. We need all the friends we can get. She has been prescient, and she is amplifying her truth-telling and warnings about the Trump, Republican, Jim Crow fascist threat. Listen to the woman.
You bring up a good point here. We're not going to get the perfect candidate. We've never had a perfect candidate. Now, we've had some, obviously, wherever you stand on it, think we're better than the others, maybe not happy with the nominee, but at the same time, it's not worth it to throw it away because people are mad right now. Okay, the left is mad that Biden isn't doing enough. And look, I'm one of them. I'm absolutely one of them. So if I were to go back in time a year ago, am I going to say, no, Biden didn't do enough, I'm voting for Trump? Hell no. I'm going to vote for Biden with a big old smile on my face and say, listen, at least they aren't actively causing harm. Because it's not, we talk about the harm reduction in the vote. It's not just harm reduction because, look, I think this is fairly obvious. I'm going to be okay. I'm a middle-class white guy in a red state, And I don't mean to say that like a jackass here, but I'm not voting because I'm worried about what's going to happen to me. I'm voting because I'm worried about what's going to happen to other people because I'm capable of doing that. I'm not going to say, well, I'm going to vote for whoever the weirdo, that the Green Party throws out there this time. I'm going to do what's best for the country, and what's best for the country is to not have somebody who actively says, I'm going to target certain sects of the population because I don't like them. That's what we're really up against.
Well, absolutely. And just to make an intervention, as I think you hit on something there, are you sure you're safe? Because if you look at the violence, the threats of civil war, the escalations, it's no longer stochastic terrorism from Trump and the right-wing hate media echo chamber. If you watch Tucker Carlson every night, that's basically the white power hour. If you read Trump's missive and the lies he's telling now, what did he recently say? That the election in November was the crime, and January 6th, the coup attempt was the reaction to depict these people as patriots. So you got a lot of folks saying, you're spot on. Yes, we got to worry about everybody. We have to create a true we the people democracy, but I think what more Americans need to wake up to, especially our white brothers and sisters, other folk who are privileged by virtue of class, who say, well, if nothing's going to happen to me, really, are you sure? Because as I see it, listening to the rhetoric, the violence, the threats, the escalation, because fascism touches everyone. And I think more folk need to realize that.
You know, that is actually a good point, and I hadn't looked at it that way. I think mostly what I focus on is just the type of legislation that we see, especially, you know, I'm down here in Florida. We have had legislation that targets transgender athletes, but only female transitions. So if you're born a woman and you transition to a man, you're okay. They don't care about that. And so that's a group that is actively being targeted. We have all of these voter suppression bills all over the country that are clearly designed to affect people of color. And so that certainly is obviously one of the biggest threats. But you're right, because I do get death threats. You know, certainly not as many as some of these other folks out here. But you're right. We all do have a stake in this, and nobody is safe. And so that is a big, big point. And I'm glad you made that, because it kind of opened me up to realize that, no, you're right. I'm not as okay as I think I am. So, you know, that's kind of a shock a little bit to start thinking about, too.
Well, you know, Noam Chomsky recently said, and he's been so spot on with this, describing the Republican Party as a group of sadists, a sadistic political party. Tim Snyder and I have used similar language. Sadopolitics, political sadism. So thinking about how fascism, the fascist creep, eventually ends up impacting everyone, even the folks, because it's a death cult, who rally to its cause, who are willing to literally die in support of the movement. Well, think about the environment. Think about healthcare. Go down the list in terms of public policy. The Republican Party is the greatest threat to the world today. Now, if you want to empower that, by either staying home or being an idealist or trying to relitigate the past and being mad about Hillary and not voting as a protest vote or whatever choice you want to make, well, then that is the world you are helping to create. Because, again, you're running out of time. The American people are running out of time, and this is no moment for idealism.
And it is really terrifying to think, too, as you mentioned earlier, that if Trump runs, it looks like he's going to win, which he didn't technically win, obviously, in 2016. He definitely didn't win in 2020. Popular vote went the other way. But I don't know that that would happen again in 2024. I think he would have a real chance of getting both the popular vote and the Electoral College vote, just because of the radicalization that we've seen take place within the Republican Party, this big purge of anybody that isn't a 100% loyalist. And so Republicans are getting afraid of being targeted. So they say, no, okay, I'm with him. I'm with him. And sure, it turns off, you know, some of the independent voters, but at the same time, they've already kind of romanticized, not to the extent that everybody has with George W. Bush, but romanticized that it wasn't that bad under Trump, was it? And that's what drives me nuts about politics, because we've been doing this for so long. We have seen it happen. You know, people have a political memory of a goldfish. If it happened 3 months ago, it's not that big of a deal. We're forgive and forget. And that's going to play a huge role in 2024 in a way that I don't think the Democrats fully appreciate. All of the horrible things Trump did, well, maybe not all, but some of them will absolutely no longer be a factor for a lot of these people out there in the country who dislike Trump right now.
And you also have the point of exhaustion. You have a lot of folk, because as you're spot on again, who don't have a memory. I think it was Gore Vidal who said this. The American people don't have a memory from past Tuesday. But they do know one thing. They're miserable. They're exhausted. They're tired. They thought that Biden would cure all things. What an unfair expectation.
Right.
You have a literal assault by the right-wing echo chamber, disinformation, lies, propaganda, the Trump fascists, the Republican Jim Crow fascists. We saw this in Virginia with turnout. People are tired. They're exhausted. They didn't see radical immediate change, never mind all the strategic and tactical errors the Democratic Party has made. Then you add in Trump's cultists, and that's based on white identity politics and white supremacy. These folks will never leave this man's side because he gave them permission to be their true ugly selves, right? Trumpism is a permission function. He gave tens of millions of Americans permission to be their worst selves. Those folk aren't going anywhere, right? They're going to rally to the cause. And then you have these claims of the big lie. Again, that's right out of Goebbels and the Nazis. But something that, again, is not getting enough attention. Redistricting. The Republicans already have the House basically won through lying and cheating, voter suppression, voter exclusion. Now you have extreme partisan redistricting. Look at what's happening in Texas, where they're literally allowing armed gunmen, white quote-unquote patriots, back to Jim Crow, to intimidate black and brown folk and other Democratic voters. Florida, what are they doing there, that governor? Oh, armed election police, more Jim Crow. And Steve Bannon has been very, very vocal in public about this. What is he telling his followers to do, the neo-fascists and others? To go and control local election boards, run on the county and state level, take over libraries, take over elections. So then you get enough of those right-wing Trump radicals who want to destroy American democracy. What are they going to do? They're going to keep people from voting. This is nationwide, and the Democrats do not have an answer.
You know, I hope people understand, too, that this strategy being pushed by Bannon right now, Bannon didn't come up with this. This was actually the KKK several years ago, not even, ancient history. I'm talking 2006. We actually did, a pretty big story on this because we reached out and we talked to them. And they told us that their goal is to get their members elected to local offices. That's where you start. You always start local, the KKK said. And this was their plan, to start to gain political power. Luckily, obviously, this didn't come to full fruition for them. But Steve Bannon's just taken that to a much larger audience because he has a big audience, which is terrifying in and of itself. And he's repackaged it, and they're taking his word. We have people that were at this Stop the Steal rally at the Capitol riot that won office earlier this month. Some of them larger offices than others, but I think what's the total tally? 8 out of 13 won their elections. They're taking over school boards after school board members are being forced to resign because of the death threats they're getting from these people. So this takeover that Bannon wants, that the KKK tried to do, is happening. And to be honest, there is a lot of overlap between those two two groups, I should say.
Well, I shouldn't be surprised, but again, sometimes you just got to be. Sometimes you just got to pick your mouth up off the floor. And it's not that you or I and others who've been trying to sound the alarm are particularly genius or prescient. We just follow what they're announcing. The Republican Jim Crow fascists, these neo-fascists, Trump, the coup, go down the list. The Koch brothers, these right-wing libertarians, as Nancy McLean has so extensively documented their war on democracy. This is all public. They announce what they're going to do, and then they do it. But you have the American people, the corporate news media, too many of the corporate Democrats especially, who act like this is a surprise. This is not a secret. As you said, Steve Bannon has a podcast, millions apparently of listeners. Listen to him. Subscribe to their email lists. They tell you exactly what they're going to do. They announced a coup. And you had the hope peddlers, as I like to call them, the people with the view from nowhere, basically saying, you all are crazy. Nothing's going to happen. And if you watch the events of January 6th, wasn't it something to see from some usual suspects on mainstream corporate news media who one moment before, a day before, were saying nothing's going to happen, you all are hysterical. The event takes place, and we're learning more and more about how extensive it was with the planning in the weeks before and after, and these same public bloviators, because I'm going to call them what I actually think they are, public bloviators, then act like they have been warning the public the whole time. When I'm like watching this saying, 10 minutes ago you were saying we were crazy. Now you want to say you were telling the truth.
It really is shocking because we had months of warnings. I mean, they knew they were intercepting posts on social media as early as December 6th that we know of. And again, as you point out, there is so much we don't know. I mean, just in the last week, we've had another, coup memo come out. This one from Jenna Ellis. We had the John Eastman one, I think, back in August. This was so involved. And, of course, the massive Rolling Stone piece saying, oh, yeah, we were actually working with people inside the White House. We were working with members of Congress. We've barely scratched the surface on all of this. And it is going to take a very long time for everything to come out, which is another reason why next year's midterms are really so important. Because if the Republicans take over, that January 6th committee is dead. It's done. We will not get answers ever. And that is a huge, huge blow to the future of the United States, I feel.
Well, even more, when they take over the House and the Senate, per the models, they're going to impeach Joe Biden. I wrote that piece at Salon, also discussed on my two podcasts, Chauncey Vegas Show and The Truth Report. I basically wrote something very simple. I said, Biden's going to be impeached. Now, he may not be convicted, but at this point, even that is up in the air. And the amount of hate mail and rage I received from that was almost as bad as the response I get from my essays about Hillary Clinton being correct. And I think it's a lot of denial. I think so many folk are in denial about how bad things are and they're going to be. They'd rather rage at the messenger. They'd rather rage at the person trying to warn them.
And it's a lot of that has to do with the fact that they may not be experiencing it right now. They look at what happened on January 6th and they say, oh, okay, well, look, everything ended on January 6th. The people are being arrested. They're being prosecuted. What do we have to worry about? Open your eyes. I mean, that's what you have to worry about. I mean, look, every day I read Salon. I read Raw Story. I go to Alternet. Every day. And you see it there. You see, okay, this person was convicted. This person was arrested. This person sent out threats to a school board, threats to a Secretary of State. This news is out there, but it's not happening in the biggest outlets. So people who are only tuning in, probably to cable news or corporate media of any kind, they're not getting the same kind of information that you and I consume on a daily basis and that you and I talk about every single day. So they think it's not happening because they're just not reading about it. And that is a huge, huge problem.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you have some great reporting, New York Times, Washington Post. The HBO series on January 6th was exemplary, actually documenting the battle, that war that took place that day. But the mainstream corporate news media is a business, right? The business model is to keep eyeballs, to get clicks. They're also one of the powerful, right? They're the news media. So you have the both sidesism. You have a deep resistance, reluctance, refusal to do pro-democracy journalism, the type of journalism that we're going to need. These folk at the elite level, they all know each other, Democrat, Republican. They go to the same clubs. Their children hang out together. So they're all part of what we used to call a power elite. So for a lot of the folk in the corporate news media, they're under deep pressure to basically toe the company line, to have some truth tellers on staff who will write an op-ed here, do some investigative work. You have so many great reporters and journalists who are trying to get the truth out, but the pressure is business. And if you're deeply invested in a system, how much and how far are you going to go to criticize it? Because these folks still believe in American exceptionalism. And for them to admit the system is in a crisis, a system they depend on, well, that's just too much.
Well, you know what? To talk about news as a business, let's also talk about that for a moment, because if you go to New York Times, you go to Washington Post, USA Today, heck, even Newsweek and Daily Beast, a lot of their articles are behind the paywall. So if you don't pay the money, you don't get it. Whereas if you go to Newsmax, you go to Fox, Daily Wire, Daily Caller, Breitbart, Zero Hedge, everything's free. You don't have to pay for anything. We're giving this to you. And that's another part of the problem. Look, I understand you're an outlet. You got to make money. But it really does do a lot of damage to people when the right-wing content, these conspiracy theories, the crazy stuff, is free to them, but you have to pay to get the truth. So, that's a big reason a lot of this is so prevalent. And this is something, that has been talked about before, not nearly as much as it should be. But a lot of people can't afford to pay for all of these different websites. Look, if I didn't have, the business that pays for these things, I wouldn't be reading some of those websites. But that is, again, why I go to Salon and Raw Story. It's free. I don't have to pay for this stuff. And so that, is a huge boon. I hope everybody listening to this does the same thing. These are great outlets with great people. we need to listen to them a little more.
Well, the other angle here, in terms of thinking about the right-wing propaganda machine, is that it is so much more effective than anything the Democrats have. And in terms of thinking about just one aspect, this is why you should subscribe to all their emails. All of them, from Trump on down, because it's an alternate reality. And it'll frustrate you to get you angry, but then you'll understand why they think and behave the way that they do, right? So here's one example, one obvious example, is that they're very good at creating community. You get people in there, you allow them to comment, you lie to them, you enrage them, you find the new boogeyman of the day, be it critical race theory or transgender brothers and sisters in the bathroom, things that really aren't happening and somehow are predators, whatever the outrage of the day, month, or year is. Then you add in that question of religion, God, patriotism, and you keep pumping them with it. 10, 12, 20 messages a day. Then you get them scared. So now they found validation and fear. And they have each other. And then they have the great leader. Or they have the people on Fox News who are their friends. It's not a coincidence that they used to have a show. I think they still do Fox News and Friends.
Yeah.
That is their friend. It's a community. And you get these folks in this cult mindset, and truth and reality do not matter. And the Democrats don't understand that. They think that empirical reality and facts will do something to persuade these people. It's a cult. The Democrats, liberals, progressives, they have no way as of present to counter this.
Well, you hit on a great point there too with the the critical race theory scare, and of course right now with the LGBTQ books that they're wanting to ban across the country. But that's just kind of the next step after they've gone after critical race theory, which, as far as I've seen, now maybe you know differently, but is there any public school K through 12 education in this country that is teaching kids critical race theory? Because if there is, I haven't found it. So it is, for all intents and purposes, a manufactured crisis, and it's teaching parents, as you and I have discussed in the past, you've got to be afraid of the others, whatever the others is. And the others could be non-white people. The others could be the LGBTQ community. The others is immigrants. The others is liberals. And critical race theory is just their latest version of going after the others that are trying to change the way you and your kids live their lives.
Well, I mean, even the language critical race theory, right? So as others have joked, if you're at an elementary school, middle school, or high school that's teaching critical race theory, it's probably one of the best law schools in the country. You should be praised. This is the best school you've ever found. So of course not. But again, the facts don't matter, right? And we also have to be very careful. I'm working on a piece about this. I've said this in interviews and on my podcast. Even the language that's used, you notice, right? Parents, schools, education. Well, we need to put the appropriate marker in there when we talk about parents. We're talking about white parents, right? They talk about the children, the kids. Now you're talking about white children, right? We're not talking about all parents. We're talking about, in particular, white right-wing parents. So we got to speak clearly and plainly about what's going on here, because the message is black and brown people are coming for your white kids, your precious white children, and they're going to hurt them. That's what this is about. And that's why you notice the language of white guilt. They're making our white, they don't say white, our children feel guilty. About what? What we're really talking about is teaching real history, but the Democrats, liberals, progressives, and others don't get it. Critical race theory doesn't mean anything. It's a floating signifier. I do an experiment. I've told folks this. I said, instead of critical race theory with this moral panic, substitute any word you want. Ham, bacon, space aliens, I don't know. The claims still work because it's just an argument about scaring you. It's not about the truth. It's not about the facts. But the Democrats want to argue facts. So their pivot is critical race theory is not taught anywhere. Or critical race theory is a legal framework or it's based in the law, understanding society, systemic institutional equality. That's true. That's great. But these people don't care. And you're wasting your energy fighting lies with truth.
And so, that does raise the question of, so what do they do? What do the Democrats do? How do they fight back against some of these, culture war, non-issue issues that Republicans are so incredibly successful with? How do we fight that? Because like you said, we go out there, we give them the facts, we tell them what's actually happening, and they still say, no, these guys are right. And it becomes this, like you're talking to a wall. Like you're having an argument with a brick wall here, trying to get through to some of these people. So, I mean, I don't know if there is a definitive answer on how we get better with this kind of messaging, but it is sorely needed. I mean, we need somebody to figure this out.
Well, the people are out there, George Lakoff and others. Just get them in a room and pay them. You have amazing consultants. If Newt Gingrich could come up with his several dozen words to use to slander, undermine the Democrats, he came up with that list in the 90s, and folks should track it down. I have no doubt that Democrats have such a list. We have the experts. We understand psychology. But these experts are not getting in the ear of the consultant class. So to answer your question very quickly, you don't engage them. You said talk to a brick wall. I don't go around talking to brick walls. You have to understand that these people are radicalized. It's a cult. What you need to do is mobilize your own voters by talking about the Democratic Party and its successes. Use plain speech and language to talk about the Republicans. I've said this before. You and I talked about it. If I was one of the consultants in the ear of the Democratic Party's leadership, they should have run a series of ads. Very simple. Donald Trump is trying to kill you. It's true. The Republican Party is ruining your schools. They want to kill grandma. Go after the brand name, the identity of the Republican Party. You're not going to get their voters. Now, what about the ones who are independent? That's shrinking number. And most independents are actually Republican voters and conservatives. But let's say you have some folk who are truly on the fence, right? Those Obama Trump voters or Biden Trump voters, people who vacillate. Well, with critical race theory, what they should have done, what McAuliffe should have done when that was brought up is said, they're liars. They think you're stupid. Let's talk about your schools and how these Republicans are defunding the schools. Let's talk about here's what we as Democrats have actually done for you. I wouldn't even debate. I wouldn't have taken the bait because the minute you take the bait, they've won. Listen, pivot, and then attack the enemy.
You know, one thing I always bring up, you know, when I do segments is I talk about the fact that Republicans are talking about this not because they're stupid, but because they think you're stupid. They think you don't understand this. And if you're supporting them, then they're right. So every time they come out with a non-issue, a stupid issue, it's not because that individual, that politician genuinely believes that this fake thing is real. It's because they know that their base is gullible, that they will fall for anything. And that's the point I always try to hit on. They don't do it because they are stupid. Now, some of them are. But they do it because they think you're stupid. And when you vote for them, you're proving them right. So that's one of the messages I go with. I don't know if it's effective. You know, people don't like being called stupid. But it's true. It really is. They know how they can manipulate their base, and that's what they go for every time, and it unfortunately works so well for them.
Well, think about the language critical race theory itself. If you're thinking about this in terms of white identity politics, someone we like to call low information voter, but they're not all low information voters. Think about the words. It has critical in it. Who wants to be criticized? Race, they're talking about white folks. They're saying bad things about white folks. Theory, well, that means it's not even true. So this is really a great weapon for the Republicans. And again, the Democrats don't understand how to fight fire with fire because, as I recently wrote in a new essay at Salon, I said it's like the Democrats are out there having a boxing match with swamp gas. This thing is amorphous. It changes. The issue is irrelevant. It's about winning and keeping power. And for at least the last 5 decades, the Republican Party, back to the Southern strategy, knows scare white people, use images of scary black and brown and Muslim people, talk about gays and lesbians, but in particular about race, scare white folks, and they will vote against their material interests every time. And the Democrats don't talk about their successes. They allow a vacuum to be created in terms of these issues of race and identity and politics. Instead of talking about race and class together and how we're all in this together, they leave a vacuum. And what happens in the vacuum? This is Propaganda 101. The Republicans and their propagandists fill that space with lies. They fill it up. And then the Democrats are on the defensive all the time.
Absolutely. It always seems like they're playing from behind. Chauncey DeVega, tell everybody where they can find you, your writing, your podcast. Go ahead and lay all that out for us.
Yeah, so Monday to Friday, salon.com. Read my various essays there. I have 2 podcasts, iTunes, Google, et cetera, all the usual places, The Chauncey DeVega Show and The Truth Report. And if you want to find out other information, chaunceyDeVega.com. And also follow me on Twitter and Facebook.
Chauncey DeVega, as I said to start this, you are absolutely one of my favorite people to talk to. We will do this on the regular basis, so thank you very much for joining me today.
Always a pleasure.